In the beginning, everything was new and bright. A magnificent garden stretched out in all directions, where the most colorful flowers burst into life, rivers flowed clear, and no worries inhabited that place. In the gentle evening breeze, a figure walked among the trees. Eve, the woman lovingly created by God Himself. Eve's every step showed her admiration and joy for the world around her. She felt the damp grass beneath her feet, heard the birds singing in celebration of the new day, and smiled at the curious animals that approached her without fear. Eve was not alone in that garden. At her side was Adam, a companion who shared with her work, friendship, and admiration for each new discovery. They explored together, laughed at the animals' antics, and learned every day about the perfect world they had been given as a gift. Eve was full of life, smart, attentive, and curious. Adam admired her not only for her beauty, but for her courage and willingness to learn. There was something about her that turned every ordinary day into a new adventure. God visited them on quiet afternoons. His presence felt like a warm embrace. He spoke about love, care, and also about limits. He said that everything there was theirs, except for one special tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right in the center of the garden. Eve listened carefully and did not understand why something so beautiful needed to be avoided, but she trusted God and followed His advice. Still, something in her heart wondered why this prohibition existed. Sometimes Eve would sit under the shade of the trees and admire the forbidden tree from a distance, lost in thought. The days were happy and full of harmony. The garden offered everything they needed, and the friendship between Adam and Eve grew stronger with each new dawn. Eve loved talking to the creatures in the garden. Her hands gently caressed the deer and rabbits, and she ran with the lions and wolves without fear, because there was no danger there. Deep in her heart, Eve knew she was part of something much bigger, something full of purpose and meaning. Living with God gave Eve a peace that was difficult to describe. He was more than a creator. He was a close friend, someone who truly cared about her and guided her with love. It was impossible not to feel special there, surrounded by such care and grace. But just as the calm of a lake can hide secrets beneath its waters, there were mysteries in the garden that Eva had not yet discovered. While the sky shone and the afternoons were peaceful, Eve walked among the trees feeling that something new was about to happen. Her heart beat fast, as if the garden itself whispered promises of learning and challenges. She had no idea that a simple choice would forever change the history of all humanity. One morning, when the sun was still gently warming the leaves, Eve was walking alone, deep in thought. The garden was silent, with only the peaceful sounds of nature. Near the tree of knowledge, she noticed a different glow among the branches. A serpent, more cunning than any other animal, caught her attention. She approached, curious about that intelligent look and the way the serpent seemed to know her. The serpent whispered words that echoed in Eve's thoughts. It questioned whether God had really forbidden the fruit because it was dangerous, or whether perhaps the fruit hid something wonderful, something that would make Eve see the world in a different way. The suggestion stirred Eve's heart. There was so much love and trust in what she had received from God, but that possibility arose as a silent doubt. Could there be something greater, something God was hiding from her? For a moment, memories of God's care and the good times in the garden flashed through her mind. But a restlessness grew, a desire to understand, to go beyond what she already knew. On impulse, Eve touched the fruit, smelled its sweet scent, and a wave of silent courage washed over her. Her hand brought the fruit to her mouth, and she tasted something strange and new, but at the same time fascinating. At that moment, a mixture of emotions flooded her heart: shame, fear, but also a strange sense of awareness. It was as if she had awakened to something that had been hidden, as if she saw the garden, herself, and Adam in a different light. With the fruit in her hands, she looked for Adam, wanting to share the experience, perhaps even seeking comfort for the anguish she felt. She offered him the fruit, and Adam, trusting her, also ate it. Something changed immediately. They realized their nakedness and hurriedly tried to cover themselves with leaves. The pure and light feeling of before now gave way to insecurity. The sound of God's footsteps, which had once brought joy, now caused fear and unease. Eve and Adam hid among the trees, but God's loving care was still there, calling them by name, wanting to talk, even in the face of their mistake. Eve felt guilt and sadness, but she also knew that a new chapter of her existence was beginning, one that was challenging and full of questions. Although fear and regret weighed heavily on her shoulders, there was a seed of hope. God had not abandoned them. There was something greater in store, a lesson behind the pain, a path of learning and redemption that was just beginning. Time seemed suspended as Eve remained hidden among the trees, her heart beating fast. The lightness that had permeated her days was gone, replaced by the weight of the secret and the echo of her mistake. Hearing God's gentle voice calling her name was, for the first time, a cause for fear rather than joy. The warmth of his words now seemed distant, bringing to the surface the responsibility for what she had done. God, attentive, searched for Eve and Adam, and even though he knew what had happened, his tone was that of one seeking a beloved child, not a severe judge. Even so, Eve found it difficult to face that look full of tenderness and disappointment. With a trembling voice, she admitted her mistake, while trying to understand how everything had changed so quickly. At that moment, the naked truth exposed not only her disobedience, but also the loneliness and fear that now dwelled in her heart. As soon as she confessed, Eva noticed that the weight on her conscience was eased by her honesty, but there was no turning back. Now she knew what had previously been hidden. She realized her own weaknesses, the power of doubt, and how much trust can be shaken by words whispered at the right moment. God explained the consequences of her choice with sadness, but also with compassion. The garden, which had once been a shelter, would now become a distant place. New challenges would arise: hard work, pain, the need to fight for life and sustenance. Eve looked at Adam and saw in his eyes the same mixture of pain and hope. Their experience had been marked by failure, but it also opened doors to a new phase, where their previously simple faith would need to grow amid adversity. God made garments to cover them, a gesture that Eve felt was caring, even in the face of punishment. She understood that although the world outside the garden was unknown and frightening, they would not be alone. From that day on, Eve would face life no longer as a series of easy gifts, but as a long path of learning, where every choice carries weight, every mistake brings a lesson, and every day offers, through God's hands, another opportunity for reconstruction and trust. As she left the garden, Eve carried with her memories of lost innocence, but also the determination to seek a new meaning for her existence. The serpent's secret had been revealed, and now she faced the greatest challenge of all: to continue believing in God's love, even when everything around her seemed to have been destroyed. She felt deep in her soul that, somehow, that fall would mark not only her history, but that of all who would come after her, making the constant search for redemption and hope necessary. The wind outside the garden carried with it the smell of raw, unknown earth, unlike the sweet fragrance of the flowers of Eden. Eve walked hesitantly, feeling the rough texture of the ground beneath her feet, while the sky, once always bright, now oscillated between light and shadow. Each step was a reminder of all they had lost, but also a silent promise that something new would begin there. The world seemed immense, vast, and untamable. The trees no longer offered their fruits easily. The earth demanded the effort of their hands, and Eve, alongside Adam, learned the work that burns the muscles, makes the skin sweat, and makes the thoughts throb. There were cold nights and days when the sun beat down, revealing their exhaustion and a deep longing for God's protection in the garden. However, the seeds planted by Eve showed that strength was born even in adversity. She learned to care for the soil, to observe the rhythm of the rains, to wait patiently for the first green shoots. She also discovered the silent beauty of persistence and hope, even far from the perfection of Eden. At night, she would sometimes wake up startled, overcome by doubts. Would they ever be accepted by God again? Would there be redemption? Amid these concerns, the love between her and Adam deepened through shared pain, mutual efforts, comfort, and kind words in dark moments. A new obstacle arose when Eve felt life growing inside her. Pregnancy brought fear and fascination. The days dragged on, her body changed, and uncertainty turned each morning into a challenge. Childbirth was accompanied by intense pain, unlike anything she had ever experienced before. There was a moment when Eve thought she couldn't take it anymore. She screamed, cried, searched her heart for the memory of God's touch, begged for relief. When she finally held her son in her arms, tears fell silently, mixing relief, joy, and a new kind of love, fierce and protective. As she looked at her sleeping son, she felt an unknown courage rise within her. Even marked by guilt, she realized that life persisted, renewing in her the desire to rebuild, to trust in God despite everything. She understood that her path was arduous but sacred, and that now, as a mother, she must guide, care for, and teach her children to seek faith and hope, finding meaning even beyond the borders of Eden. There, in the vastness of the new world, Eve felt maturity grow like deep roots, capable of withstanding all winds, nourished by the hope that one day, through renewed trust, humanity could find its way back to the heart of God. The days and nights passed slowly, marking Eve's time in a continuous cycle of work and hope. The world rose before her, both beautiful and merciless. Distant hills hid dangers, and unknown trees cast long, silent shadows. One morning, waking with a strange feeling, Eve felt an old weight return to her chest. Adam slept beside her, their children suspended between warm skins. An inexplicable restlessness took hold of her spirit as she walked alone, watching the damp mist touch the leaves. In that solitude, a silent struggle raged within her, guilt and hope intertwined in her thoughts. Despite the time that had passed since the fall, the memory of God's voice visiting her in the garden remained vivid, bringing pain and longing. The tension that morning intensified when she heard, in the distance, a sharp cry from one of her children. Eve ran, her heart pounding, fearing the worst. She found her two older sons arguing, overcome with blind rage. The youngest, frightened, had fallen on the rocks, his forehead wounded. The oldest, with clenched fists, was panting and looking at her with dull eyes, where fear and pride were mixed. Eva felt an abyss open up beneath her feet, as if reliving the moment when she heard the serpent in the garden, realizing that evil now also dwelled in her offspring. Desperate and overcome by a silent plea, she knelt beside her wounded son. Her hands trembled as she touched the wound, but remembering the words God had spoken to her before they left Eden, she murmured a prayer. She did not know if God still heard her, but she put all her faith in that moment. Gradually, the blood stopped flowing and the pain seemed to recede from the boy's frightened eyes. Eve couldn't explain what she felt, a delicate hope, as if, for a moment, a breeze from the garden whispered in her ear. Sitting between her children, she felt the impact of the transformation. For the first time, she understood that evil was not just something external, but also something that had to be overcome within each of them. The real miracle was the ability to resist hatred and guide her children to forgiveness, teaching by example that love can transform even the darkest memories. Looking around, Eva felt that even far from Eden, God had not abandoned them. She realized that she would continue to fall and get up, but at that moment, she promised herself to plant in her children the seed of a faith that resists storms, a faith that is calm and grounded in love. Night fell heavily on the earth, bringing silence and a thick gloom that seemed to intensify Eva's weariness and worries. She sat outside the rudimentary tent, hugging her knees, and looked up at the star-studded sky, so distant, so mysterious. The wind whispered through the leaves, bringing back memories of times when God's voice was so clear and close in the garden. The longing for that intimacy tightened her chest, but in that darkness, Eva felt an intense need to seek the presence of the one she had never forgotten. Her words of prayer broke the silence of the night. She spoke to God as she had done so many times in solitude, exposing her pains and doubts, asking for strength to continue and wisdom to guide her children on the path of righteousness. Tears flowed hot as she remembered the violence between her children, the hardness of the soil, and the constant feeling of separation. But that night, when all seemed lost, something changed. A gentle peace, like a translucent veil, descended upon Eva. Warmth enveloped her tired body, and a breath of hope filled the cold night. Eva felt, deep down, that God was listening. There were no audible words or bright lights, but an immense conviction flooded her soul. She and her family were still under the watchful eye of the Creator. Faced with this invisible touch, Eva made a courageous choice. She gathered Adam and her children around the fire and, in a calm and firm voice, shared what she had experienced in her prayer. She spoke of trust, hope, and the certainty that, even though they were flawed, they were not totally removed from God's love. Together, on that dark night, they decided to raise a small stone as an altar. Around that symbol, they offered prayers and declarations of faith, offering their own work, joys, and sorrows, surrendering everything with confidence that God's mercy would accompany them. After that night, the difficulties did not disappear, but a new strength arose in Eva's heart. Now she perceived the presence of the Eternal One in small gestures, in the sprouting seed, in the pain that subsided, in the embrace of her children, in her daily perseverance. She felt part of a greater purpose, transformed by faith and the silent miracle of reconciliation. She decided to move forward, steadfast, with her eyes turned toward heaven, renewing her hope that as long as God was sought with sincerity, it would always be possible to start over. When the first ray of sunlight broke through the morning gloom, Eva awoke with a different clarity. As she left the tent, she felt the dew slip between her tired feet, and, for the first time in a long time, she looked at the horizon without the shadow of her old burden. The marks of the past ran like veins through her history, but now they seemed to lead to something beyond guilt or loss. Her gaze wandered over the field where the first crops were growing, the result of months of patient care and daily sacrifices. His children ran around, now older, helping Adam build simple fences around the crops. The world was harsh and unpredictable, but nothing seemed as devastating as before. Inside him, an understanding grew silently, like an empty seed that one day breaks through the earth in search of light. That morning, Eve felt an urgency to gather the family. They sat together around the stone altar, still marked by nightly prayers, and she spoke with deep sincerity, without fear or shame. She shared the journey they had taken since Eden, the enchantment and freedom, the pain of choice, the fall, the pilgrimage, the pain and work. She spoke of the sleepless nights, the panic and the dreams, the endless time devoted to caring for her children, sowing the land, and constantly trying to rediscover a lost presence. The words took on a different weight. Each event, however painful, became part of a larger fabric, interwoven with learning and grace. As she spoke, Eva realized that all the pain had generated tenderness, All the disappointment had become humility. The strength she had built up for her children came from the love she had learned to cultivate in the dark days. The mistakes of the past, so feared and condemned, now revealed themselves as a starting point for a more complex existence, full of awareness, responsibility, and hope. True closeness to God lay in accepting this vulnerability, in the daily choice to forgive and patiently build a new life. At that moment, Eve no longer felt ashamed when she remembered the lost garden. Her eyes shone with the recognition of her purpose, to learn to love unreservedly, to care despite shortcomings, to transform pain into strength, to choose the path of reconciliation. The climax of her understanding came like a calm wave. There, outside Eden, far from perfect protection, she finally became whole. As she looked at her children and Adam, she felt a quiet pride in each one's survival and courage. An indestructible bond united them, born of shared experience, of faith reinvented with each new beginning. Eve lifted her face to the sky, certain that in vulnerability and love lay the answer to everything she had lived and would live. The days passed, and Eve noticed subtle changes in everyone around her. The field, once barren and resistant, now boasted rows of green shoots and promises of harvest. The hard work had become a ritual of collaboration and tenderness. Adam, once gloomy and silent, now welcomed his children with gestures of humor. The children, in turn, knew how to measure their strength, controlling old rivalries, sharing the burden, and learning together. Eva watched each one with the eyes of someone who had seen the abyss and recognized the value of each reconciliation. In the warmth of each embrace, in the laughter that sprang up around the fire, she felt that scars had healed and that the body and spirit, once marked by deep pain, could now truly open up to life outside Eden. At dusk, Eve liked to sit alone, letting her gaze rest on what they had built together. The voices of her family echoed like music among the trees, and she constantly gave silent thanks for every little miracle. The increasing abundance, the peace that had settled in their homes, the love that now flowed freely, unhindered by the barriers of the past. One of those afternoons, she found one of her sons, the youngest, with tears of joy in his eyes because he had managed to pick the first fruits from his own orchard. He ran to Eve, offering them as a gift, and she saw in that gesture a concrete symbol of overcoming adversity. The harvest was more than the fruit of sweat. It was a visible sign of victory over despair, a loving response from God to her prayers. Eva began to understand that true redemption would not come from an impossible return to the past, but from personal growth, love, and courage that blossomed amid the new conditions. The family, united by daily affection and silent sacrifices, had developed deep roots that no storm could uproot. Every night, around the stone altar, their prayers changed. They were no longer just requests for comfort, but thanks for the chance to start over, for continuous learning, and for renewed faith. Pain and separation still lingered in their memories, but they no longer defined their destiny. Eva's face radiated serenity and quiet contentment. She knew that everything she had experienced had been transformed into healing, certainty, and lessons. In the hope she conveyed to her children, she saw the true purpose of existence outside Eden finally fulfilled, to recreate, every day, a new world based on love, forgiveness, and the choice, always, for hope. As night fell, after a day filled with hard work and quiet joy, Eva felt a calm marking the air like a soft whisper. The moon bathed the field in a silvery light, and the wind carried the fragrance of flowers, mixed with the scent of moist, fertile earth. That night, something pulsed differently in Eve's heart. It was not longing or regret, but a deep expectation, a feeling that seemed to have been growing since the days of Eden, maturing like fruit hidden under the leaves. Gathered with her family around the stone altar, she saw each face illuminated by the fire. Adam, with a serene and proud countenance. Her children, attentive, their eyes shining with belonging and complicity. Eve took each of their hands in hers, feeling the living warmth of the union they had built, and offered a silent prayer, more a sigh than words. Suddenly, the silence was filled with a light breeze, and a peace so deep descended upon everyone that the old pains seemed to dissolve into the air. Eva felt the burdens disappear from her shoulders like leaves in the wind. The weight of guilt, the constant fear, that cold emptiness of absence faded little by little, giving way to a luminous, unmistakable presence, as if God were approaching again, no longer to judge, but to comfort and celebrate the faithfulness of that woman and her family. The children felt at first a simple, growing warmth that brought tears not of sadness, but of gratitude. Adam sobbed softly as he held Eva's hand, and in that moment, everyone knew, without doubt or explanation, that they were reconciled. What they had lost in the garden had been found again in the midst of the anxious earth, the difficult days, the calloused hands, the scarred hearts, and the hope kept alive when the nights were long and cold. Eve raised her eyes to the sky and felt herself enveloped by invisible arms. Nothing else was missing. A feeling of complete integration, that everything had been worth it. The exile, the pain, the doubts, sprang up in every cell, and a silent promise echoed in her soul. They were finally home, not because of the place, but because of everything they had become. Before the simplicity of that stone altar and those beloved faces, Eva tasted the miracle. Her heart was finally whole and free. When the sun rose on the horizon, gilding the worked earth and the simple tents, Eva awoke feeling completely renewed. The world seemed different, filled with hope and silent blessings. She walked through the field and saw the furrows full of green shoots, a symbol of overcoming and perseverance, testimony that every tear and every pain had become seeds for a better future. The laughter of her children echoed among the trees, mingling with the birdsong, and Eva realized how love had grown and taken root, making them truly a family. She sat down on the damp grass and, with her face turned toward the sky, felt God's presence hovering gently over everything, no longer distant, but now a companion in her daily new beginnings. She understood then that the true Eden was not a place of untouchable perfection, but the space where the heart learns to embrace weaknesses, to forgive, and to always start over, in communion with the divine. The fall and exile showed her that pain and hope walk hand in hand, and that forgiveness is the soil where everything can flourish. The meaning of life was not in avoiding mistakes, but in growing through them, transforming guilt into learning and suffering into compassion. Eve gathered her family once again at the stone altar and, hand in hand, gave thanks for each one's courage and for the quiet miracle that manifested itself each new day, the ability to love even in the face of loss and to never lose hope in starting over. Adam's eyes shone with pride, and his children embraced her with tenderness and gratitude, recognizing the silent example of a woman who dared to believe in tomorrow, whether it was easy or difficult. The cycle closed not with a return to paradise lost, but with the conquest of an inner paradise, the one that grows in the hearts of those who forgive, persevere, and cultivate hope. In that final moment, Eve understood that her legacy would be much more than humanity's first step. It would be the silent force of new beginnings and faith, passed on to her children and future generations. She smiled, finally at peace, ready for whatever came next, certain that God would accompany them on every journey. If you were moved by Eva's story, don't forget to like it, comment on what you thought of this journey of redemption and love, and subscribe to the channel to receive more inspiring stories like this one.